2011's Priest was a major misfire by Sony Pictures Screen Gems at launching a brand new action horror franchise in the likes of Resident Evil or Underworld. It had big fights, big spectacle, big explosions, big vampires, and still ended up a big failure on the big screen. So join me today as we revisit this franchise that never was. We'll explore the history, analyze why it missed at the box office, and I'll offer up some of my own thoughts on the project. A feature film adaptation of Hyung Min Woo's Korean comic book series Priest was first announced way back in 2005. Sony Pictures production company, Screen Gems, bought a spec script written by Corey Goodman, which was a loose adaptation of this comic book series. A year later, the director behind the 2005 remake of The Amityville Horror, Andrew Douglas, was hired to direct Priest, while Gerard Butler was in negotiations to play the title character. Additionally, principal photography was scheduled to kick off in Mexico on October 1st. However, this version of the film never made it to production, and the project would sit in limbo for several years before it got the chance to see the light of day. By 2009, Douglas was out as the director and would be replaced by Scott Stewart. Additionally, Paul Bettany would take over Priest duties from Gerard Butler. This would not be the first time this director-actor duo would work together, as Bettany previously starred in Stewart's 2010 film Legion, which was also produced by Screen Gems. The rest of the cast was filled with the likes of Carl Urban, Cam Gigandet, Maggie Q, and Lily Collins, just to name a few. Filming kicked off in August of 2009, shooting in LA. By the end of production, the budget was estimated to be around $60 million, which at the time was Screen Gems' most expensive film. The movie was originally meant to hit theaters on October 1st of 2010. It was then moved to November 27th of 2010 to fill a slot after Screen Gems' Resident Evil Afterlife was postponed. Then during post-production, the filmmakers and studio decided they wanted to convert the film to 3D, even though it was shot with the intention of being 2D. This 3D conversion caused the release date to be pushed back several months to January 14th of 2011. The movie was then pushed back a final time to May 13th of 2011 so that it could attract summertime audiences. Priest had an opening weekend gross of $14 million, coming in at number 4 in the box office behind Thor, Bridesmaids, and Fast 5. Domestically, it would make $29 million, and overseas, it would rake in $49 million, for a total worldwide gross of $78 million. And against that budget of $60 million, not even including marketing, distribution, or the theater's cuts, that made this a certified box office bomb. As a result, the sequel that was teased at the end of the film never came to fruition. So now that we've explored the history behind the movie, let's discuss a few reasons why it failed. A common reason why Priest failed both commercially and critically is that it was just too derivative. It's borrowing a lot of ideas and concepts from Judge Dredd, which in itself was a box office disappointment. It also shares a lot of similarities with another sci-fi dystopian action vampire horror film, Daybreakers, which came out 2 years prior. It also has a similar visual style and subject matter to the Resident Evil, Blade, and Underworld franchises. I think for a lot of people, this movie just didn't look interesting or fresh enough to make an effort to see in the theater. Not to mention, it's reminiscent of Stewart's previous film, Legion. While it was a box office success, Legion got bad reviews, which may have soured the concept of another religious-based action horror film starring Paul Bettany to many theatergoers. You would have thought Screen Gems would have wanted to save Priest for October, since it is a horror film after all, but it seems like they overestimated its widespread appeal and they chose to drop it in May. Vying for the summer season spelled doom for this project, as the release date placed it between two major tentpole franchises. It came out 1 week after Thor and 1 week before Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides. These two films were especially formidable competition, as just like Priest, they were PG-13 action-adventure movies with the intended demographic of teenage boys. And that's another issue with Priest. They went laser-focused on that one demographic through the marketing, not bothering to appeal to anyone else. And when they couldn't grab that one demographic they were gunning for, making back that $60 million budget was impossible. I think they could have benefited from a different lead actor as well. While Paul Bettany is certainly a talented actor and gained acclaim from many projects before Priest came out, I'm not sure how much box office pull he had for an action movie. Last but certainly not least, this film just wasn't all that good and didn't inspire positive word of mouth. No doubt it has its fans out there, but as a whole, it missed both with critics and general audiences. Just take a look at the reviews. Priest currently holds a 5.7 out of 10 on IMDb, a 41% on Metacritic, and a 2.4 out of 5 on Letterboxd. Additionally, it has a 16% critic and 46% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, with the critic consensus saying this: sleek and stylish, but those qualities are wasted on a dull, derivative blend of sci-fi, action, and horror. But now I would like to share some of my own thoughts on this film and explain why it just isn't very good. With the super dark color grading, excessive amount of slow motion, cheesy dialogue, non-stop posing, and edgelord characters, I would have thought this was a Zack Snyder movie. Okay, that was a joke. I don't want the Snyder cult coming after me. Also, sorry in advance to anyone that likes this movie, but I'm about to say some mean things about it. But first, let me give a quick recap of the plot, which means spoilers ahead for any of those who have not seen this movie. Also, as a fun drinking game, take a shot every time I say priest. But if you die from alcohol poisoning, I take no responsibility. The story is set in an alternate world where humans and vampires have been battling each other since the dawn of time. To get the upper hand in this war, humans trained these elite vampire-killing soldiers known as priests. The humans win the war and the vampires get put on reservations. The lead of this film is one of these battle priests by the name of Priest, who is struggling to integrate back into society after the war has ended. Recently, his brother was attacked by vampires and his niece was captured by them. So Priest goes out to get her despite the government telling him not to. Priest then teams up with a Wild West sheriff known as Hicks, and they go out to rescue Priest's niece and find out what's going on with all these vampires. Along the way, they team up with another priest, and they find out the guy who orchestrated all these vampire attacks is another priest who was Priest's old friend, but is now a vampire and is an evil priest. They stop this evil priest from bringing a train full of vampires to the city, they rescue Priest's niece, who is actually his daughter, and then it ends with Priest walking off into the sunset to kill the vampire queen in the sequel that never happens. Basically, if you've seen the 1956 film The Searchers, it is the same exact plot, but with vampires. Alright, right off the bat, this film upset me because it has 3 false starts. First, we get a brief flashback of these priests on a mission that ends up going south and our main character's buddy gets dragged away. Then, we get the backstory of the world through some pretty dope animation, which is probably the best scene in the movie. And then, we open up again on this family who get attacked by some vampires and the daughter ends up getting captured. And finally, the story officially starts with Priest going into a confession booth. Now, all 3 of these scenes are important to the plot, but the problem is, we are being pulled around from different locations and times, 3 different times in the span of 10 minutes before our main story officially starts. This is extremely jarring to the audience, and it doesn't let us properly set into the narrative. And all of this stems from my main issue with this movie, that being that it's just overstuffed. Not only do we have to establish the whole backstory and rules of this world, but we have the central rescue mission of Priest saving his daughter, we have the friends to enemies plot between Karl Urban and Paul Bettany's character, we have the dynamic of the older experienced vampire killer guiding the younger newer guy, we have the other priest being charged by the government to hunt down our main character, we have a forbidden romance subplot thrown in there, and we have to set up the sequel that will never happen. Now, all of this wouldn't be so bad in theory, but we also have to fit in the action at the same time, and all of it has to be under 90 minutes. On top of this, they are also trying to juggle some pretty heavy themes at the same time, which have to do with religion, theocracy, how veterans reintegrate into society, morality, pollution, and systems of oppression. And with all of this crammed in there, they never get the chance to give any of these themes the proper time they deserve. As a side effect of this runtime and overstuffed nature, we never get a chance to truly know our characters beyond the surface level. This is especially apparent with the character of Hicks. There's absolutely nothing going on with this guy, and the performance by Cam Gigandet is pretty bad and left me cringing. The main villain of this film, Karl Urban's Black Cat, is also a total misfire. The main allure of this character is that he's supposed to be Priest's old friend who was corrupted after a mission went wrong. However, we never feel any of the emotion of this dynamic because we never got to see their friendship together on screen outside of a 5-second clip in the beginning. As a result, he's just boiled down to a cliche, over-the-top villain that is doing bad for the sake of doing bad. One of the most upsetting parts of this movie to me is how the filmmakers adapted this interesting, unique world and then populated it with the most generic, stereotypical plot and characters you could ever conceive. No hate to Paul Bettany, but Priest as a character just kinda sucks. I've never really been a fan of the protagonist with a troubled past who doesn't show emotion and is just here to kill things and do some posing. I never felt attached or cared about this character, and his non-stop edgy one-liners felt really forced. Now, at no point does this film claim to be remotely realistic at all. However, there were two different scenes that made me laugh out loud and broke whatever immersion I had. That's the scene where Priest jumps off rocks in midair, and this other scene where Hicks is thrown out of a speeding train but just kind of tumbles like it was going 10 miles per hour. Hilarious stuff. Whether or not this film deserved better or is an overlooked masterpiece is up for debate. I thought it sucked, but I know it has its fan base out there, so it must have landed with some viewers. I've said all I need to say, and it's time to wrap this up. Priest was just a movie that was not interesting enough to warrant its own series, failed to reach its target demographic, and was placed between two popular franchises. That paired with bad reviews led to a disappointing box office, and the film was pretty much forgotten by a majority of moviegoers. So that's the story behind Priest. Yet another franchise that never was. But what are your thoughts on the film? Have you seen it? I'd love to know down in the comments. This has been Tom from Isenhart Productions, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week. And here's a clue for next week's video.